Sampling is the backbone of a whole bunch of music genres, and if you think it's a case of grabbing a loop and dumping it into a track and just letting it run through, you are completely mistaken. In this video, I'm going to guide you through 3 different options, kind of a beginner's and intermediate and pro level sampling, each with 3 different uses and the difficulty of how they are all used. So you will hopefully learn a few things and be really quite surprised at the creativity you can bring using samples in your music. Let's get started. So part 1, working with the sample as it is audio. Bear with me though, way more complex than it might initially seem. So for context here, I've got a drum loop in because I find it makes a lot more sense if you've got context of what you're doing with the sample. So having a drum loop over gives us that. If you disagree, fine, move on, see you later. What I've done here is just taken a splice sample, dragged it in, dropped it in, and I've specifically made this track 90 BPM and picked a sample that's not in the same BPM so that I can show you this. Obviously, if you've got samples at the same BPM, that doesn't matter. You can speed it up, but I wanted to make it the most realistic example where you find the right sample not quite fit, etc, etc. So dragged it in, dropped it in here in Logic, and for context, this is how it sounds right now. All right, so we're drifting out of time, and there's some elements that I would like to put at the start and maybe loop over. So we can do that in audio is a really quick way of doing it. And like I said at the start here, each technique isn't beginner, intermediate, advanced. They've all got their own uses. They're just different in complexity. I would use this and still use this all the time. So the first thing we're going to do is just make sure this sample fits in with the overall BPM. That's 85 BPM, we know that, but simple way to do it in Logic, make sure you've got the setting on here where you can go to the bottom corner and it allows you to drag the audio. If you press Option, that will let you drag it and just snap it into position. Another way you can do that is right click on the audio piece itself, and you want to go down to the tempo section just here, and we can do apply project tempo to region and downbeat, and it will do something similar to what we just saw. Easy way to do it. Now we can see via our waveform, if we even zoom in just a touch here, that sort of every half beat, right? So every half, we've got kind of a significant bit of impact happening. So if we bring our playhead to there, if we press T and I, that gives us the cutting tool, obviously. Here's the pro bit. If you hold down Option, it will now cut the entire audio to those segments, which is really, really useful for us, isn't it? Now what we can do from there, if we just double tap T and go back to our normal tool to move around, we can move these sections as we see fit. What I like to do is just then take the whole sample, throw it over here, and just leave myself one section. I'm going to zoom right in here and you'll see why. I'm going to put a tiny little fade in the end, like one click. If you're unable to do that working on a laptop or something, or maybe using the iPad version because you're a sadist, then we can go to the drop down over here in Inspector, and you can do fade out and just put a 1 in there. So once we've done that, we can duplicate this as much as we want, do divide and conquer, so select it and just keep duplicating it like so. And let's just loop over this 1 bar now. So highlight all of those and press U. There's another tool built into Logic that lets us move these samples around and juggle them around really easy. If we press T, it doesn't have a shortcut, it's here, it's called the slip tool. And what that lets us do is move the audio around in those segments we've chopped out. So now I can open up with that section right here like I wanted to and go. Now I could move this along and find that next part, get that to ripple off like so, and build it out from here. And as you can see, it doesn't move as if it's part of the audio, right? It moves relevant to whatever you want it to be. As you can see though, it can be a bit finicky, but we could do like, all right, let's find that, maybe repeat that. I'm going to speed this up and just kind of find an idea and chop it in. Once you've found some kind of chop that you like, however you want to do it, here's another thing you can do. We're going to double tap T to get our normal marker back. We can move this whole section over. While it's all highlighted, use the slip tool again, and we can slip the whole lot onto different snap points like so. And sometimes we can get away with just doing that for another section. because we're working on audio, it still means we can do things like this as well. So let's take this very last sample here, have a look in the inspector. Take the fade out and make that a slowdown. We can tighten up some of these. Now at the minute it's really hard, choppy. If you don't want that kind of style, something else we can do is we can now make use of the crossfade and we can smooth everything into one another. So that little fade we did right at the end, we can drag that the opposite way and crossfade everything together. It's a lot smoother. So that only took us 2 ticks there. What was the original sample sounding like compared to what we chopped? So that's the beginner sampling technique, which I still use all the time. It's super fast to work, but only really works with certain samples. And if you want to get a little bit more complex and evolve the sound, well then we need to look at the next option. All right, so for intermediate, we're going to take it into a different type of sample, a different way of sampling, and some advantages that come with that. So let's begin. So I'm going to grab this sample right here. I'm choosing this because we've got those chops and I want to make them into something else. So we can just drag this over here. When we drop it in, we're going to use the quick sampler this time. And quick sampler allows us to chop the sample into little sections and string it across the keyboard, using it more like a MIDI instrument. But it allows us to do things like ADSR and velocity as well, giving us way more flexibility. 2 things, I specifically picked this sample again because it's in the wrong BPM, it's set to 80. So one of the first things we can do is switch this guy on and follow tempo, and it will bring that into the right timing for us. Easy, job done. Now in terms of how hard we want this to be chopped, if we were to play this right now on a MIDI keyboard, it's okay, but we end up with like a lot of these smaller sounds, and then especially up here, little bits that we won't want to be so independent, right? So we can use the sensitivity here and drag that back, and I just want to get the big block samples really in this case. So when we're sort of roughly there, I'm going to manually remove things like that, and just tidy it up as I want it. Like over here. So we can probably get rid of this. And you would go through and tidy up all of your sample. I'm just going to use this first half as an example. So now that we've got that, we can use our keyboard like down here, or we can go and draw it in MIDI. We're going to draw it in MIDI today, and we'll just give ourselves a 2-bar pattern that we can then loop. So if we double click this, we can open up our piano roll, and we can now see we've got all of our individual chops here. And it means we can do things like this. So we could now have those 2 hits happen where they wouldn't normally. And if we find that we're triggering those samples and we want to do them quickly like that, but they run on a bit longer because really they're like this, we can fill it out however we want. But bear in mind, we also have control that we could go and change the polyphony and put that down to mono, and then it would always cut itself off like this, which is way closer to what we want if we're going to then quickly do things like this. There we go. So we've got a rough loop cut up. Now, the reason that we would do this like this and not the audio chop way we did it before is we've got some extra flexibility. So we can make use of things like velocity. If we open up this option here, as you can see, we've got note velocity, and it can be a really nice effect to have things that land on the bar be much louder and then everything else a little bit down. It gives us more of an ebb and flow in the way the sample's been chopped. So even though we're going to say trigger the same sample twice effectively, we have it one be much louder than the first. We can go. So we can bring it in like that, have this one quieter again, bring this one up. Samples that are a little bit quieter, a bit louder. So now we've got so we're able to have that more feeling and ebb and flow, and we can get more out of the sample rather than it just being the same level all the time, always playing the same. We can evoke more feeling out of it. Now we can take that a step further and make use of things like the ADSR. So we've got different controls we can do in the quick sampler, but the most basic one would be the overall volume, which is just here. By default, it just has an attack and decay, but if you want to, you can change it so you've got a hold and release and things as well. So we can now have it so just these very short hits. We could dial it in to work however we want. If we want it so it never impacts with the drums, we can give it a bit of an attack. So it has to sweep up each time. Really exaggerate that so you can really hear what I mean. Yeah? Something like 40 milliseconds you'll hardly notice. It'll give space for the drums to whisk up through. Now here's an advanced thing that you can do within this intermediate section. We can do things like switch off filter run, for example. We can make it so this ADSR down here is controlling the filter. So we can do this and we can give it, oh, that's a sustain amount. Go into our mod matrix and we'll take it so that we've got the filter envelope here, and we'll send that to the filter cutoff. And we can draw that in. We can now make it so this opens up that filter. We can use our decay time. Shape that however we like. Now we don't have to link it up in the mod matrix. You do have an envelope depth here where you can just pull it in if you want to, but showing you the mod matrix, that means you can now create and do and link to whatever you want in whatever way you desire. Gives you more tools to work with. But a quick and easy way is use your envelope depth tool right there. So now let's move on to the advanced stuff. Today's video is sponsored by DistroKid. They let me get my music out to all of the major distributors, and they do that at a price an independent artist can easily afford. If you're ready to get your music or beats out there and want to release an unlimited amount of music each year, check the link in the description below for a discount off of your first year of unlimited distribution with DistroKid. Right, so now for some advanced sampling. I've brought in this piano loop here. Now it tells us it's in D minor. The first note sounds like a D, and that's important for us to know. Now, if you've got a sample that you don't know what it is and you can't necessarily figure it out, I just want to share a quick way in Logic you can do that. What I've done here is just bashed a pitch corrector on this sample, and when we press play, it detects it as a D immediately. If I loop over just that one note, we can see it's basically triggering a D. If the pitch corrector's kind of wobbling all over the place and you can't quite figure it out, and you happen to have this wonderful tool just here called Pro Q, look for your lowest fundamental frequency. So that's probably going to be this down here. Hold down here over the spectrum and go and see what that is. And boom, it highlights it at the bottom that it is in fact D3. So there's two ways you can find the key, or at least the note of a sample, nice and easy. Now for what I'm going to show you, you can do whatever you want in the future. I'm just going to do this as an example here, where I'm going to take a single note. Be creative, take anything you want that you think might work with what I'm going to show you and utilize it. You don't have to copy pasta exactly what I'm going to do. So I want this one single note here. I'm going to just cut that out and get rid of everything else. I don't want this little bit at the end, so I'm just going to bring that back a touch and put a teeny tiny little fade in like so. All right, and I'm just going to print that to its own bit of audio right here. So we're going to go to bounce and join, bounce it in place. We're going to just call you piano D note, and we're going to bash you on a new track. Lovely. So there he is. I'm going to mute this guy, press H and hide that away so it's not in my way. This D note, I'm going to drag over here to the left, and I'm going to go sampler zone per note and drop it in there. That is going to open up a wonderful sampler for us. Now we've got just one single note in here. You can put hundreds, thousands, maybe a million in if you want. We're sampling here. We're taking this one note and trying to make something else out of it. Now I've called it piano D note, so we've got a reference of knowing what it is. This thing, however, doesn't necessarily always figure it out, but in this case, root key D2, it's done it for us. You want to check that and make sure it's the right note that you sampled, that we checked for. Remember, we did it with the pitch correction. It was 2 minutes ago, but people skip ahead. If it doesn't say that, set this root key to that note, ideally in the right octave. I think when we checked in Pro Q, it was D3, this is D2, fine, it's good enough. So this allows us to do a lot of what we did in the quick sampler, but now with a single note, meaning we can do things like this. So there with our singular note, we've got a completely new melody. Now, we can shape this and do all the other stuff that we did with it beforehand. But we've got some other incredible features in here as well. Now that we've got a singular note, we might want to make it run off a little bit longer, for example. It's got quite a good tail on it already, but it does just stop. We can get a little more creative with that. So in this zone section here, I'm going to do snap at 0 crossing. Where it says mode no loop here at the bottom, I want to try and make a loop of some kind. So let's do alternate, and it's going to try and find, using the 0 crossings, a point where it can loop over. That's maybe a little bit too harsh. We have a crossfade that can help us pull it in a little bit, but we might need to find something a little bit better. Should we so need it, we could utilize that. Another way you can look at looping the sample if you're having trouble is going into edit and literally hitting auto loop and auto loop within area, and it will find something for you. In this instance though, I found that that bigger loop that we did was a much better decision. Like we did with the sample chops before, you might not want to play all these notes one over the other. When you've got one single note and you're kind of pitch controlling it across everything, a chord won't necessarily sound right. So you might want to go into details, switch the mode from poly to even legato can be kind of fun. Give it a bit of glide. It moves and pitches up into one another. Or you may just want to go straight mono. We can then utilize things like unison instead. And we can give it a random detune. And we're really starting to build a completely different sound now. Now this particular sound's got a heavier sound in the left than the right. I can just control that with panning. Somewhere around there. You could resample it and just use the right side or the left side, whichever you want, but this gives us a nicer spread. We've made a whole new kind of sound, right? And we haven't even put any effects or filtering or anything fun on it yet. You know, we could do something like driving the filters, dialing the filter right back. We could take LFO1 here, for example, apply that to the filter cutoff. LFO1 is just here. We can put sync on, have that sync in, say, a sine wave to the tempo of our track. Remember, we started with this. If that's not creative sampling, I don't know what to tell you. So that right there, that's the advanced, taking a single note, making something completely different out of it. I really hope these videos have been helpful for you. If you've got any questions, comments down below as always. Thank you very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in future videos. Take care.